Every television season tells 100 stories, but once in a lifetime, a single story changes what a stage is for. On a clear October morning in Chicago, Harpo Studios woke to that kind of story. Long before anyone in the audience knew it existed. Inside the brick building in the West Loop, the day began with cables, cameras, and checklists. Lighting techs tested the grid above Stage A, bathing the famous cream-colored chairs in soft amber. Audio engineers walked the aisles saying, "Check 1, check 2, their voices echoing off the high ceiling that had heard more confessions than most churches. At a corner desk overlooking the loading dock, senior producer Renee Collins sat alone, staring at an email she had already read 3 times. She had produced the Oprah Winfrey Show for 13 years, and thought she had seen every kind of story: surprise reunions, life-changing gifts, apologies decades overdue. But this message, sent at 11:47 the night before, felt different, like someone had slipped a folded piece of history into her inbox. The subject line was simple: my grandfather's unfinished graduation. The sender was a Stanford University senior named Sophia Rodriguez, who wrote about watching Oprah with her grandmother after school. Then, in careful paragraphs, she began to tell the story of a man who believed his life had a missing ending. Her grandfather, Michael Rodriguez, had been the first in his East Los Angeles family to attend Stanford. He had been 3 credits short of a degree in history when he left for Vietnam as a combat medic and never returned to campus. A mortar blast near Da Nang shattered his spine, ended his ability to walk, and he was convinced ended the part of his life that might have made his parents proud. Sophia's email attached scanned transcripts, showing strong grades and 3 lonely empty boxes where final credits should have been. There were old black and white photographs. A young Latino student in a Stanford sweatshirt, leaning against a bicycle under a sandstone arch, eyes bright with possibility. There were military records, a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, reports of lives saved under fire, letters from veterans who said Mike had talked them back from the edge years later at the VA. For 48 years, Sophia wrote, her grandfather had counseled other veterans 3 days a week in a VA hospital. He helped them fill out college applications, encouraged them to use their educational benefits, insisted that they were more than the diplomas they never got. Then he came home to a living room where his own Stanford textbooks still sat on a shelf like ghosts of a life interrupted. He believed he had failed. He believed he had left something sacred unfinished, and no amount of medals or decades of service seemed able to override that quiet, corrosive thought that he had disappointed the people who believed in him. Sophia's final paragraphs changed everything. She explained that Stanford's current president, Dr. Elizabeth Thompson, had read her research paper about veterans whose education had been interrupted by war. Moved by Michael's story, Dr. Thompson had convened the Board of Trustees to consider using his military service as academic credit and finally granting him the degree he had abandoned to go to war. They were close to a decision, Sophia wrote. They wanted to do something special when they told him. And when Sophia looked at the television in the corner of the VA waiting room where Oprah's reruns were still playing, an idea came to her. If my grandfather ever deserves to hear he didn't fail, she typed through tears, I can't imagine a better place for that than your stage. In the morning meeting, the Harpo conference room buzzed with the usual controlled chaos of a show day. Writers, segment producers, and assistants filled a long table covered with coffee cups, folders, and color-coded rundown sheets. They were scheduled to tape an episode about unfinished chapters, people returning to education after years away, second chances at long-abandoned dreams. Renee waited until they finished discussing the planned guests. Then she slid Sophia's email and attachments across the table to the woman at the center of it all. Oprah Winfrey had listened to more stories than some therapists and more secrets than some priests. She picked up the packet, read in silence, and the room quieted around her almost instinctively. People had seen that look before, the way her attention narrowed, the way her eyes grew bright when a story found a place in her heart. She studied the photograph of young Michael in his sweatshirt. She traced, with her fingertips, the scanned image of his Purple Heart pinned to a uniform stained by time. She paused over Sophia's words about the old textbooks on the living room shelf. "How old is he now?" Oprah asked softly. 68, Renee replied. "Wheelchair. VA volunteer. Still thinks he's a failure because he never walked across a stage." Oprah's jaw tightened, not in anger but in recognition. "How far along is Stanford?" she asked. "They've reviewed everything," Renee said. "The president and board are preparing to vote on his degree this week." Dr. Thompson said, "Sometimes the most meaningful education happens far from a classroom." Oprah closed the folder gently, as if afraid to disturb the fragile weight inside it. "He thinks he's coming here for a panel about veterans whose education was interrupted," she said slowly. Renee nodded. "That's what we told him." Oprah looked up, and in that moment the entire show shifted course. "This will not just be a panel," she said. "This will be his graduation." By early afternoon, the lobby filled with audience members in their best clothes, excited to be part of a special Oprah event called It's Never Too Late. Usher staff handed out tissue packets along with the usual release forms, a quiet hint of what was coming. Posters along the walls showed scenes from past episodes where lives had pivoted in the space of an hour. In the audience, a young woman with long dark hair squeezed the hand of the older woman beside her. Sofia Rodriguez sat next to her grandmother Maria in the third row, both of them dressed as if attending a ceremony no one else knew about yet. Maria's eyes kept drifting to the stage, to the familiar cream chairs and the warm lights, as if trying to imagine her husband in that world. Backstage, Michael Rodriguez waited in his wheelchair near a curtain, folded hands resting on his knees. He wore a carefully pressed brown suit that had once belonged to his father, altered to fit his changed frame. On his lapel, his Purple Heart gleamed under the backstage fluorescence. The medal he rarely mentioned, pinned over the part of his chest that still felt unfinished. He believed he was here to talk about other veterans healing. He had no idea that this day was secretly designed to heal something in him. When the familiar Oprah theme music rose and the announcer's voice boomed through the studio, Stage A came alive with applause. The doors opened and Oprah stepped into the light, dressed in a deep plum dress that moved gracefully. As she walked to the center mark on the floor, she greeted the audience with a wide smile, but there was a particular gravity beneath her warmth that a few longtime viewers might have recognized. "Thank you," she said, raising her hands to calm the cheering. "Today's show is about something every one of us understands, whether we ever set foot on a college campus or not." She let her voice soften, drawing the room closer. "It's about the stories we tell ourselves when life interrupts our plans. It's about the moments we decide we don't deserve to finish something we started. And it's about what can happen when the world gently says, 'That story you've been telling yourself is not the truth.'" Behind her, the big screen flickered to life with images of classrooms, closed campus gates, and stacks of old textbooks. "There are people watching right now," Oprah continued, "who still lie awake at night thinking about the diploma they never got, the chapter they never closed, the promise they never kept to themselves. Some of them say, 'It's too late for me.' But what if it isn't?" The audience grew quiet. Oprah's eyes shone, not just with studio lights, but with the beginnings of tears. "Let me introduce you," she said, "to a man who has spent nearly 50 years believing he failed." The side door opened, and a soft mechanical whir threaded through the silence. Michael Rodriguez rolled into view, his wheelchair crossing the polished stage, the Purple Heart catching the light like a small, steady star. For a moment the audience simply watched, then rose into applause that felt deeper than the usual welcome. A kind of standing respect. Oprah stepped forward to meet him. "Mr. Michael Rodriguez," she said, her voice rich and warm, "welcome to the show." He smiled shyly, nodding once. "Thank you, ma'am," he replied. "My wife used to watch you every afternoon. She never thought she'd see me sitting here." The audience laughed softly, the tension easing for a heartbeat. They positioned his chair beside Oprah's, the cameras carefully framing them at equal height. Oprah sat, folded one leg under the chair, and leaned in with the attentive stillness that had disarmed guests for years. "Michael," she said gently, "tell everyone why you think you're here today." He took a breath, fingers brushing the edge of his medal. "I was told," he said, "you were talking to veterans who had to leave school and never made it back. I spend a lot of time with men and women like that, trying to help them understand they're more than a piece of paper that never came." His eyes dropped to his hands. "The thing is," he added quietly, "I never really believed that about myself." The audience fell absolutely still. Oprah's voice softened. "Take us back," she said. "Before the chair. Before the VA hospital. Take us back to the young man who got that acceptance letter to Stanford." On the screen appeared a black and white photo of Michael at 21 standing in front of a Stanford arch in his sweatshirt, sunlight in his smile. "I was the first in my family to go to a fancy university," he said, the memory warming his voice. "My father worked nights at a tire factory. My mother cleaned offices. When I opened that letter, it was like someone had opened the sky." He talked about sitting in lecture halls, so big they made him dizzy. He talked about falling in love with history, with the idea that stories could explain how humanity moved from one moment to another. He talked about calling home every Sunday to tell his parents what he was learning, hearing the pride in his father's silence on the other end of the line. "I was going to be a history teacher," he said. "I wanted kids from my neighborhood to know they belonged in places like that." Behind him, the screen showed a busy campus, books spread across library tables, young faces bent over notes. "And then?" Oprah asked quietly. "And then the war," Michael replied. The images shifted to archival footage of helicopters, muddy boots, and green jungle stretching to the horizon. "I was 3 credits short of my degree," he said. 3. "I told my professors I'd be back in a year. I promised my mama I'd finish. I promised my fiancé. I believed it when I said it." His hand tightened around the armrest. "Vietnam did not care about my promises," he murmured. "I became a medic, a kid from East LA, trying to keep other kids alive." He spoke of field hospitals built under trees, of bandaging wounds by flashlight, of counting heartbeats with fingers slick from someone else's blood. He described the fear that lived in his throat like a stone, and the way his hands still moved even when his mind screamed to run. "People call that courage," he said. "I call it doing what had to be done." Then came the moment that split his life in two. "They tell me it was a mortar," he said. "I remember a flash of light and then waking up on my back, staring at a ceiling that wasn't the sky. A doctor stood over me with a chart and said I'd never walk again. He said, 'You should start thinking about what you can't do anymore.'" The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some touching their own legs as if to reassure themselves. "The first thing I thought of," Michael continued, "was not running or dancing. It was, I will not be able to go back to school. I will not walk that stage. I will not give my parents that moment." He looked at Oprah, eyes wet. "For almost 50 years I've told other people their worth is not defined by a diploma," he said. "Then I go home, look at the shelf with my old textbooks, and hear a voice in my head saying, 'You failed. You didn't finish.'" The silence in the studio had a weight to it now, like a held breath shared by 200 people. Oprah let that silence stand, her own eyes glistening. Then she leaned forward slightly. "What if," she asked, "the people who love you, and the institution you left, do not agree with that story at all?" Michael frowned, puzzled. His wife in the third row squeezed Sophia's hand so hard her knuckles turned white. The cameras drifted. "Ready." Oprah reached down beside her chair and picked up a plain manila folder embossed with the Stanford seal. "In this folder," she said, "is your original Stanford transcript. There are also letters from men whose lives you saved, testimonies from veterans you counseled, and a packet from a certain young woman who has been very busy on your behalf." Michael glanced toward the audience, confusion blending with dawning suspicion. Oprah smiled through tears. "Sophia," she called, "Maria, would you both join us?" Every eye turned to the third row as Sophia and Maria rose. They made their way down the steps slowly. Maria steadying herself on her granddaughter's arm. Applause rose, softer than usual, threaded with emotion. When they reached the stage, Sophia knelt beside her grandfather's chair. "Abuelo," she said, voice shaking. "I'm so sorry. I've been keeping a secret." Maria rested a hand on his shoulder, eyes shining. "I wrote about you for school," Sophia continued. "I wrote about veterans whose education was interrupted by war, and my professor said it was more than just a paper. I realized the only person who still thought you failed was you." Michael opened his mouth, but no words came. His hand reached blindly for his wife's. Oprah turned toward the big screen behind them, her next words carrying the weight of a drum roll. "There is someone else who would like to talk to you," she said. The screen flickered from images of war to a live feed of a beautiful hall lined with banners and red seats. A woman in academic robes stood at a podium beneath an emblem recognized around the world. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the vaulted space. "My name is Dr. Elizabeth Thompson, and I am the president of Stanford University." A collective gasp moved through the audience. Michael stared, his fingers gripping the wheels of his chair, eyes fixed on the screen. "Stanford," he whispered, as if saying the name might make it disappear. Dr. Thompson smiled kindly from thousands of miles away. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said, "I am standing on the stage of Memorial Auditorium, where you would have graduated in 1976 if history had taken a different path. Your granddaughter brought your story back to us. Your grades, your service, your decades of work with fellow veterans." She described how the Board of Trustees had convened, how they had read the letters from soldiers whose lives he had changed. She spoke about reviewing not just lecture notes and exam scores, but the kind of knowledge no syllabus ever names: leadership under fire, compassion in chaos, resilience in the face of permanent injury. "The question before us," she said, "was whether we could recognize that your education did not end when you left our campus. It transformed." Michael's chest rose and fell quickly, his eyes never leaving the giant screen. "In a unanimous vote," Dr. Thompson said, her voice thick with emotion, "the Board of Trustees decided that your service as a combat medic constituted the completion of your degree requirements. Your actions in Vietnam and your lifelong commitment to helping veterans are, in our view, the highest form of applied education." She looked directly into the camera, into his stunned face in Chicago. "Mr. Michael Rodriguez," she said, "it is my honor to inform you that you are, as of this moment, a graduate of Stanford University with a Bachelor of Arts in History." For a heartbeat, time seemed to stop. Then the studio exploded into applause, cheers and tears. Some audience members were standing on instinct, hands over their mouths, eyes fixed on the man in the wheelchair on Oprah's stage. Michael did not react at first. He stared at the screen like a man looking at a mirage in the desert. Then his hands flew to his face, shoulders shaking. "No," he whispered, not in rejection but in disbelief. Oprah reached for his arm. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, Michael, you did not fail. You finished with honor." On the screen, another figure stepped up beside Dr. Thompson. A woman in her mid-50s, silver hair pulled back, wearing a different set of academic robes and a small trembling smile. "My name is Dr. Patricia Williams," she said. "I am Dean of Student Affairs at Stanford." She explained that she had spent her career calling names at graduations, watching students cross stages, placing diplomas in eager hands. "There has always been a part of me," she said, "that thought about the ones who never made it back to finish. Today, Mr. Rodriguez, you represent all of them as we close that chapter in full view of the world." Then it was Oprah's turn to stand. She walked to a small table at the side of the stage and picked up a leather folder embossed with the Stanford seal and a velvet-lined academic hood in deep crimson with blue trim. Her hands shook, just enough for the cameras to capture. "President Thompson and Dean Williams have entrusted me with something," she said, returning to Michael's side. She knelt so she was at eye level with him, audience and cameras leaning in. "In this folder is your actual diploma," she said. "Not a prop, not a television gesture. The real thing. She opened it and showed him his own name written in elegant script, the words Bachelor of Arts in History beneath it. The date carried both the year he should have graduated and the year he was finally being recognized. The studio lights reflected off the glass in his eyes. Michael Rodriguez, Oprah said, voice steady. On behalf of Stanford University, I am honored to present you with your degree. She placed the folder in his hands. He held it like something fragile and sacred, a piece of paper heavy with 50 years of longing. His body shook as sobs rose from somewhere deep and long buried. His wife leaned into him, weeping openly. Sophia rested her head on his shoulder, shoulders trembling with relief. The cameras caught the kind of tears that do not belong to television, but to humanity itself. Then Oprah stood once more and lifted the crimson academic hood. She held it up for the audience, the velvet catching the light like a river of color. When I asked Dean Williams what symbolized the highest achievement in education, she said, she told me it was this hood worn by those who have dedicated their lives to learning and to using that learning in service. She moved behind Michael's wheelchair, the audience rising almost involuntarily to its feet. Michael, she said, voice resonant and full, you have been a teacher without a classroom, a professor of survival, courage, and compassion. She leaned forward and gently placed the hood across his shoulders, arranging it with the same care she might give a crown. Today, she said, we honor not only the degree you began, but the wisdom you have pent your life giving to others. For a long moment, no one spoke. The audience stood, tears streaming down faces, hands pressed together or raised in applause. The image froze in thousands of minds at once. An old man in a wheelchair, a medal on his chest, a diploma in his hands, and a doctoral hood around his shoulders on a talk show stage, transformed into a sacred platform. When Michael finally found his voice, it was raw and small. I thought that part of my life was buried in a jungle, he said. I thought what I lost over there meant I would never be enough over here. He looked at Oprah, then at the camera as if speaking to every unfinished heart watching at home. I was wrong, he whispered. You brought me home. The show ran long that day. Segments were cut quietly in the control room. No one argued about timing while an entire audience filed past the stage to take Michael's hand. A young woman said her brother had come back from Iraq angry and silent, and this gave her hope he might believe in himself again. A middle-aged man confessed he had dropped out of college decades earlier to care for a sick parent and still call himself a failure. He promised himself right there to enroll again. A fellow Vietnam veteran gripped Michael's hand and simply said, "Welcome home, brother." Within 24 hours, the clip of Oprah placing the hood on Michael's shoulders had been viewed millions of times. The moment Stanford's president announced his degree was replayed on news shows and shared in group messages and classrooms. The hashtags "Never Too Late" and "Honor in Service" trended, but the numbers could not measure the private revolutions happening quietly in living rooms and late-night thoughts. Stanford soon announced the creation of the Rodriguez Fellowship, a program dedicated to veterans whose education had been interrupted by military service. The fellowship did more than pay for tuition. It formally recognized that some of the most demanding classrooms in the world had no desks and no chalkboards. Other universities watched, and slowly they began asking how many of their own Michaels they had lost between wars and semesters. 18 months after the episode aired, Michael Rodriguez died peacefully in his sleep. In the small house in East Los Angeles, where he had lived for decades, 2 frames hung side by side above the shelf of old textbooks. In one frame was the Purple Heart he had rarely spoken of. In the other, his Stanford diploma, finally earned in his own eyes as well as on paper. At his memorial, packed with veterans, family, former patients, and university representatives, Sophia held up a photograph. It showed her grandfather in his wheelchair, on Oprah's stage, hood on his shoulders, eyes closed as applause surrounded him like sunlight. "This," she said, voice thick with grief and pride, "was the day my grandfather stopped calling himself a failure." Oprah, filming on the other side of the country, sent a letter that was read aloud. In it, she thanked Michael for turning her stage into a classroom she would never forget. She wrote that he had taught millions of viewers that honor is not a moment but a life lived in service. That some graduations arrive far later than anyone expected, but right on time for the soul. Back at Harpo, a photograph from that day was added to a hallway lined with memories. In it, Oprah stands behind Michael's chair, hands on the hood she has just placed, while the studio audience rises in a standing ovation. A small plaque beneath the frame reads, "Sometimes the most important degrees are conferred by the lives we touch." And somewhere, each time the episode plays again, a narrator's voice carries the lesson across years and screens. That worth is not measured by documents alone. That chapters we think are closed may yet receive a different ending. That it is, truly, never too late to come home to the story of one's own dignity. On that day, the Oprah Winfrey Show was not just entertainment. For 1 hour, under warm lights and in front of cameras, a talk show became a graduation stage, a sanctuary, and a mirror. In it, millions of people saw that the stories they tell themselves about failing might just be waiting for someone to gently say, "That's not how it ends."